In 1952, there was a woman by the name of Florence Chadwick. She was 33 years old. She's from San Diego, and she attempted to do something in life that only a few people had ever done before. She tried to swim 26 miles from the coastline of California out to the island of Catalina. I mean, she was kind of a legend in the swimming world in the 1950s. When it came to long-distance swimming, at 10 years old, she became the youngest person to ever swim across San Diego Bay. And then at 32, she had swam across the English Channel. And so she had this goal in life: I want to swim even further. I don't know if I could walk 26 miles, let alone swim 26 miles to the island of Catalina. So one morning, she chose to set out from the beach of California, and she headed out into the open ocean. It was just her and a little boat that was next to her with some people that were watching out for sharks and that would save her if she got injured. Remember, this is 1950s. There was no smartphones. There was no GPS. They just had a compass, and they knew where they were heading to try to get her to swim 26 miles to the island of Catalina. 15 hours into her swim, there was this thick fog that moved across the waters, and herself in the boat that was guiding her couldn't see a few feet in front of them. And she kept swimming and swimming and swimming, but she lost faith, she lost courage, and at about hour 16, she stopped swimming and she got into the boat. And out of breath, the fog cleared a few minutes later, and they realized they were only 1 mile offshore from Catalina. She'd been swimming all that time, and she didn't make it. And she says she sat in the boat, and she looked out at the island of Catalina, and she looked at the shoreline, and she just stared at it. And she got this vision in her mind of that shoreline. And this was a woman who had swam long-distance races before, and so she was determined. And so a couple months later, she tried it again. It would take me a couple of years to come back to that, if ever. A couple months later, Florence Chadwick left the shore and she began swimming. And about the same time, hour 15, hour 16, that fog moved in over the waters again, and they completely lost track of where they were. But this time, she had something different. She had that picture in her mind of the shoreline. And she said she kept swimming with just her vision and just her faith to keep going and going and going. And about 2 hours later, she reached the shoreline of Catalina. Not only that, she broke the women's record at 33 years old. And when she talked to reporters, they said, "How did you do it? You were in the same place you were last time." And she said, "I had a vision of the shoreline that gave me the faith to press forward even when I couldn't see what was coming up right in front of me." Here's the point. She was able to press forward by faith because of a vision of that shore. And what I want to talk about today is, what is that vision in my life, in your life, and in the life of our church? What do we look at? What do we envision to turn us into a spiritual family, to light your faith on fire, to get you to press forward in faith, even when you cannot see? So with that, I want to welcome us to this brand new series that we're calling Forward by Faith at Miracle City Church. Because in just a few weeks, we're going to start this pretty epic journey, aren't we, as a spiritual family? We're going to start on this journey of opening our doors in a very public way to the city of Minneapolis and to the world, that we're going to have to live by faith. And even as you found in your own spiritual life, we've got to live by faith. We've got to go the full distance, and it's going to have something to do with pressing in to what the Bible talks about and what Jesus and the Father talk about as faith. So what we're going to do in this series is we're actually just going to look at one chapter of the Bible. And that chapter is Hebrews chapter 11. You've probably heard of it. It's called the Hall of Faith, or the Hall of Fame of Faith, where the Bible lists these heroes, these men and women whose lives were defined as people who pressed forward through life even when they couldn't see, and they had great faith. And I wish I could just give one message and give you the fullness of what faith is, but faith is a lot bigger than that. The Bible talks a lot about faith. And so we're actually going to start to unpack that through this series. We could probably teach on this for a year. There's a lot of people listed in Hebrews chapter 11, but I've picked out a few stories that give us a few really important facets of what is faith. Like, how does the Bible talk about faith? How do we have more of it in our life? And then how are we going to move forward as a church by faith? So to start out, I kind of want to give us an overview today and then dive into one of these stories in a message I'm titling Crossing Oceans and Climbing Mountains. Crossing Oceans and Climbing Mountains. So if you got your Bible with you, turn it open to Hebrews chapter 11, where I just want to give us a baseline of what is faith. I mean, we talk about faith a lot. We're people of faith. We're a church of faith. The Bible uses the word faith a lot, but what does it actually mean? And if you look at Hebrews chapter 11, starting in verses 1 and 2, this is going to give us this baseline definition. You with me this morning? Talk to me. You there? Hebrews 11, 1 and 2. Here's what it says faith is. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's the evidence of things that are not seen. For by it, the elders obtained a good testimony. Now, let's pause there, because this gives us kind of a baseline definition of what the Bible teaches about faith. And faith, it's saying, has three things it calls out. It says faith has substance, faith has evidence, and faith has got a testimony. Let's start with substance. What does substance mean? I mean, the word literally means, if you look at the original language, to stand under and to support. It's the same kind of word you get for the foundation of a building. I mean, oftentimes you kind of think of faith as like the extra stuff of faith. It's kind of like, well, yeah, you have belief, but then like some people got faith. Like they've got like something more than that. What the Bible teaches is that faith is actually foundational. And it's foundational because the faith, when the Bible talks about it, is faith in an object. You have to put your faith into something. There's a lot of things in our life we can put our faith into that are not very good things to build our life on because they'll disappear like that. Right? You can build your faith on your resources and your money, but you know it can go up in smoke like that. When the Bible talks about faith, it says you put your faith in the object of God. But here's where it gets kind of interesting, because the foundation that you're building your faith on, it's literally saying, I want you to do that with God, but you're not always going to get all of the path in front of you. Sometimes in faith, you're not going to know if you're like a mile from shore or if you're 100 miles from shore. And then when it talks about evidence, it kind of steps it up a little bit, because evidence means conviction. When the Bible talks about faith, it doesn't want us to be people that just live with this understanding of what faith is. Evidence means, no, I want you to be absolutely convinced that who God is, what He's promised, what He's said, that this is the way to live your life, and you have confidence in what God has said, even though you can't see it. Now, is anybody else in the room that feels like that's just confusing? What in the world? How are we supposed to live our lives like that? Let me give you two simple ideas that aren't going to make it any simpler for you, but that may make it a little bit more clear. Okay, faith starts with the foundation of God. And when we talk God, we're also talking about His Word and His character, the things He's promised, the things that He's said, who He is. That's where faith starts. Faith isn't an emotion. Faith isn't a vibe. Faith isn't a feeling. It's an objective faith in God, His Word, and His character. Make sense? Now here's the catch. Faith also requires uncertainty. It's a God who we can't always definitely see the way in which He's working or how He's going to work it out. But He says, trust me, I've made a promise and it will happen, but I'm not going to give you all the details on exactly how it's going to happen. I mean, sometimes in my life, maybe I'm the only one, but probably you too. I think about faith and uncertainty, and I'm like, how do those things work together? Like, I think if I've got doubts and I've got questions, I can't be a person of faith. Like, I've got to sort out all my stuff to have faith. Has anybody ever thought that in your life, or just me? Like, doubts and questions, then I can't have great faith? But if we look at what the Bible says, it says faith actually includes doubts and questions. Faith includes uncertainty. The opposite of faith is certainty. So if you have uncertainty, that actually means you're set up to have great faith. Does that just make anybody else's mind just kind of like, how in the world did this happen? That's why there's a Hall of Fame of Faith in Hebrews 11. This is not exactly either. And so I wrote this down. I thought, this is true in my life. It's probably true in your life. Uncertainty isn't the problem. It's our love of certainty that is the problem. Does anybody just love living by uncertainty, not knowing whether there's going to be a surprise at work, you're going to get laid off from your job, you're not going to have enough money? Anybody just, yeah, that's a great... No, we all love certainty. I was reading this study that was done where scientists have found this is kind of like wired into us, into our heart and into our thinking. They had this computer program where on the screen, just imagine this, there's a bunch of cartoon rocks, and under these rocks are these cartoon snakes. And the goal of this game, and they did a lot of different tests, was you click on a rock, and if it had a snake underneath it, you lost. But it gets worse because they hooked up electric to people's arms and bodies, so when you clicked on a rock with the snake, you got zapped. So here people are, they're sitting there studying them, and they click on a rock, and there's a snake under it, and bzz, they get shocked. And then they do it again, and they didn't get shocked. And they pick it again, and they didn't get shocked. And then they pick another one, bzz, oh, they got shocked. They found this cartoon snake. Now what the people didn't know is it was all random. That there were people behind the screens programming this to try to figure out, what do people actually think about uncertainty? And what they found with the test is that humans would rather with certainty get shocked by the snake bites rather than uncertainly have it happen less frequently. So they would say, I'd rather get shocked every time and know that I'm getting shocked rather than 1 out of 10 I'd get it, but the other 9 times I wouldn't. They found out this is like hardwired into us. We just really like to avoid uncertainty in our lives. And I was thinking about that. I think spiritually, when it comes to faith, we can feel and we can act the same way. That we can think, I would rather take a spiritual life where I am spiritually bored and I'm shallow in my faith, as long as it doesn't require the uncertainty of faith. I'd rather be certain and shallow and kind of spiritually bored than I would knowing that it's going to require this uncertainty of me. Like, I'd rather just wade in the shallow end of my relationship with Jesus. And here's the hard part, is you can do that. God doesn't want that for our spiritual lives. But you can wade into the waters of just an elementary faith and never actually wade into the uncertainty that great faith takes. And I just want to encourage you, if you're feeling like that, God wants us as a spiritual family. He wants you in your life to live a life of great depth into the heart of God. He wants us to live life of great faith in Him, but it requires great uncertainty. And if you feel like you're in situations, if you feel like your spiritual life is maybe dull or you're just kind of bored with the elementary stuff, He's calling you to move out of that. He's calling our church to move deep into the waters that require faith, but it's going to require uncertainty. If you face uncertainty, it's actually an open doorway to faith. It's not a bad thing. It just goes along with faith. Does that make sense? So if that's what faith is, if that's what God's calling us to, how do we have more of that in our life? And that's where the third thing comes in. Remember, it says that there's faith is substance, it's evidence, and it's what else? It's a testimony. They're saying there's elders that have a testimony. And what they're saying is if you look at Hebrews 11, you will find these stories of great faith to get these different angles of what it really took to move the heart of God when it came to their faith. And so what I want to do today is look at one of those stories, and then over these weeks, we're going to keep looking at these stories. They're really good. I just encourage you, be here every week of these series. It's going to encourage your heart. It's going to challenge us. And today I want to look at the story of Abraham. Now, raise your hand if you've heard of Abraham. Yeah, a lot of us, almost all of us have heard of Father Abraham, and many sons did he have. And one of them was named Isaac. You know, Abraham is this guy who, in Hebrews 11, you'll notice he takes up a lot of the space. He's got 3 different stories from his life that are mentioned in Hebrews 11 about his faith. He's like 3-time MVP when it comes to faith. If you don't know his story, there's Abraham leaves his homeland in a place called Ur, and God says, I want you to leave Ur, and I want you to go to the land of Canaan. He had no idea what was in Canaan, and so he moved his whole family, and he went to a brand new place. And he has a second story mentioned in Hebrews, which was him and his wife, and they couldn't get pregnant. But God made him a promise that they would, and they actually got pregnant when they were like 90 years old. That's not the one I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the biggest one, the one that's a bit hard. And that's the one found where his son, God asked him to give his son as a sacrifice. See, because the place that we're going to find great faith is in the testing of our faith. That's what you'll find in common with all the people in Hebrews 11. They all had some serious tests of their faith. And here's what Hebrews 11 says about Abraham in that test. It says, by faith Abraham, verse 17, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son. And even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned, we'll talk about that, Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And so, in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead. What a strange story. Let me clear the air on a few things, because you're like, we're talking about child sacrifice here and God wanting him to sacrifice his only son. God's not asking any of us to do that today. Okay, what we're going to look at is a very unique instance in Abraham's life that comes in the context of how God had worked through Abraham and in that time. There's two things you got to know that maybe some of you know, but let me just refresh your memory about how God had worked at that time. Because it can seem almost strange, it can seem almost evil that God would call out to Abraham and say, sacrifice your son. But Abraham would not have thought that was evil. Abraham wouldn't have had a thought in his mind that God is maniacal and he's asking me to do child sacrifice. Because Abraham knew all of the symbols that God had given him. See, when people sinned against God, they forfeit their life. That's still true today. That sin is like a blood disease that's passed down from generation to generation. And because God's holy and sin is unholy, it has to be dealt with. There is a justice that comes into people's lives when they sin against the Creator. That's something me and you have in common. We have both sinned, and so there's something demanded from our life. And Abraham knew that. But God did this interesting thing. Abraham knew that he owed his life, and in that culture, he knew that he would owe his firstborn son's life, but God didn't make them cash in on it. God would give them these symbolic sacrifices where they could put their sin on something else, and God would say, I will let that thing die in your place. I will let that thing take the payment of the debt that you owe me. But Abraham would have known in his mind at any time God could cash in on that, and like, I owe my life, and I owe my son's life as well. So Abraham wouldn't have thought this is weird or evil. He would have just thought, well, God's asking me to do something that I owe him anyways, and now just must be the time. If you're looking for places to read about this, look at Exodus 13. Look at Numbers 18. There's some really crazy rules in there, but they're all symbols. That's how Abraham would relate with God. He would have to look at these symbols and kind of piece together what God was teaching and what God was teaching him about. Now, the other thing you got to know about Isaac is that was their one son. And every promise was passed through that son. So everything that God said to Abraham would go through Isaac. And God had made a promise to Abraham that it would be through his offspring that he would be reckoned. That means he would be redeemed. And God even leveled it up through Abraham and said, through Isaac, all of humanity is going to be redeemed. That God would do something. He would send a Messiah through the lineage of Isaac and Abraham that would put to right everything that sin had put wrong in the world. Now I'm a parent, and Finn is at this age. It's so cute. When he hurts himself, he will make a special cry, and he will run up to us with his hand or foot that he hurt, and he wants us to kiss it and make it feel better, right? So he'll go, and then you kiss it, and then everything is fine in the world. But you have to think of Abraham and Isaac. Like when other kids got hurt on the playground and scraped their knee, he was probably like, okay. But when Isaac did it, He was like, come on over here, buddy. Let's check the infection. Let's put some bandages on that, because he knew if Isaac died, that's just not a bad thing. That spells doom to the entire world, because God promised him he's going to reckon everybody. If Isaac dies, that's the end. There's no more hope for people, which is really strange, because in Genesis 22, I want to look at this story. Here's how God tests Abraham. He says this in Genesis 22:2. I'll have it up on the screen as well. Take your son, your only son, who you love, Isaac, and I want you to go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain that I will show you. When God tests our faith, and you need to know this in your life for whatever you may be going through, when God tests our faith, it's always going to involve two things. The first thing it involves is something that you dearly love. And it's going to involve a second thing by saying, are you willing to obey God with what you love most? That's why God is talking so affectionately to Abraham. He's like, take your son, your only son, who you really love, that son Isaac. This is something Abraham really, really loves in life. And God says, I want you to obey me with what you really love, right? Because faith is all conceptual until we actually have to do something with it. It has to be acted upon. And so I just want to get your mind thinking this morning, get your heart thinking. What do you love in life? I mean, what do you love most in life? I mean, I wrote some things down that I love. I love my family. I love my plans. Does anybody else love their plans? I love what is coming up in the future. I love my view of life. I love my schedule. But God would say, I want you to even obey me with your time and everything you spend time on. Maybe you love your resources. These are good things. You love what you've earned. You love your money. You love your home. You love your apartment. You love your things. But God would say, would you be willing to obey me with those things that you actually love in your life? Maybe it's a relationship. And God's saying, would you be willing to obey me in your relationship and with the people that you love most in your life? I mean, here's what we're going to see. Write this down, because this is a big idea we're going to start to unpack. Is great faith is choosing to obey God with what we love most. Which I can think sometimes that great faith is moving to the jungle and living with a nomadic tribe and teaching them about Jesus, right? And being a missionary. Like certainly takes great faith, but this is actually more accessible. This is actually something that comes into our lives. If you look at Abraham, God's saying, would you be willing to obey me with the people that you love most in life? And he's testing Abraham with it. And Abraham, this is wild. This is what Hebrews says. He said he trusted God so much. He said, if I do end up killing Isaac, I know God can raise the dead and God will make good on his promise. Can I be vulnerable? That would not be my first response. Anybody else is like, I got such great faith. No, none of us have that kind of faith. I mean, to say God could even raise the dead, I trust him when it even comes to something you cannot understand what in the world God was up to. I mean, I'd have some serious reservations. I'd be like, God, what are you doing? Why would you punish me like this? Why would you bring this trouble into my life? Which is sometimes how we can respond and we can act when God tests us, can't we? We can feel like God's against us. We can feel like God is trying to hurt us. But Abraham knew something. Remember, he's mentioned 3 times. Abraham knew something that I feel like God wants to speak into our spiritual family this morning. Abraham knew God's tests are to help us, not to hurt us. You may need to write that down if you're going through a test or you're going to go through a test. God's tests are to help us. They're not to hurt us. They can feel like hurt sometimes, can't they? It can feel like God's out to get us. But Abraham knew God's tests actually help me in my spiritual life, even though I may not like how he does it. See, one of the primary reasons, there's a lot of reasons in the Bible of why he tests us, to build perseverance, to build spiritual muscle, yes. But one of the primary things that the Lord is trying to do in your life when he tests you with things that you love is he's trying to show you what you love most in life. Not because he doesn't know, but because we can become so blinded to the things that we have given our love over to, that we've made primary things that are just supposed to only be good things. He wants to know what is first in our lives when it comes to love. I mean, this is what Jesus revealed. He said the greatest commandment is to love God with all that we are. God is supposed to be our first priority. But God knows something true about our hearts. It's real talk. And I struggle with this. Probably the biggest one in the room. We struggle to keep God first in our lives. We struggle to keep our love and our devotion first for God and our lives. And it's different at every moment of lives because things change. We've got to grow and we've got to learn different things. And it was different for me as a single person than it was when I got married. And it was different for me and my wife when we had a kid than then. And every stage of life, He's bringing tests in our life so that we realize what is first in your heart. And is it me? Because the Father is so jealous for you because of his love. He actually wants to reveal into us, what do you love most? And I'm willing to test you on it, to see and to prove to you what is first in your life. And Abraham, we're going to see how he does in this test, but man, let me just make you feel normal, because this makes me feel normal. The other test Abraham got, he bombed. Man, he did like terrible. There was the one where he said to leave Ur and go to this new homeland. And Abraham's doing this thing. He walks past Egypt, and Pharaoh says, "Hey, is that your wife? She's really pretty." And Abraham said, "No, that's not my wife. That's my sister." Wow, what a great man of faith. Failed the test. And God was revealing in his heart who was first to Abraham. I mean, you could read about when they had a kid, and did they trust God with their family planning. You get this story where they didn't succeed so much, but Abraham knew that wasn't to hurt me. That was to actually show me in my life what is primary when it comes to our love and our devotion. And it just begs the question, what is primary in our heart as a church? God's going to test our church because he wants to help us, not hurt us. And he wants to see, is Miracle City Church really going to have a first love for Jesus and a first love for God? If you're being tested right now, would you just see with eyes of faith? It's not to hurt you, but God may be revealing something about what you love most in your heart and what has taken priority. Because if it's not him, he's willing to wage war on that in your heart in order to get you to a place of putting him first in your life, the best place we know we need to be, but we don't always realize we are. See, there's another thing you need to know, because it's not just about us. It's not just about what do I love. Tests also reveal who loves us. It's not just about what I love, it's about who loves me. And what you'll find is, when you look at Abraham's life, and if you look at your life story, God is escalating his revelation of what is in his heart for us at every test along the way. And you've got to pause and you've got to think about it. I mean, when you see Abraham, his first test was what? To leave his homeland. When God said, I want you to leave Ur and I want you to go to this promised land. It was God revealing what was in his heart to Abraham. And he was saying, Abraham, I love you so much that it doesn't matter where you live or where you go. I love you more than my place of living itself. I love you more than heaven itself, Abraham. And I'd be willing to leave behind all of that to be the God who walks with you. And no matter how long that distance is or what life is like in that new place, I love you, Abraham. And I want to show you, no matter where you live, I'm with you. And I will never leave you, and I will never forsake you. That's what Abraham would say from that test. Yeah, it was hard leaving my homeland, but God loves me that much, and he showed me how much I actually do love him. And then he demands his family, right? He says, I want you to trust me with your family plan, even though that has never worked out. And Sarah's into her 90s, and it's going to be impossible for Sarah to have a baby. God is saying, but nothing is impossible with God. And Abraham, I want to teach you that you can trust me, that you can obey me with what you love most, because there is nothing that will stand in the way of me welcoming you into my family. And he taught him that through this test. And he's going to teach him that through this test. With his son Isaac, he's saying, Abraham, I know you love Isaac. I love Isaac too. And I know it doesn't make sense on paper, and I know his death spells doom for the entire world. This doesn't make sense. Abraham, I know what I'm asking you to obey, and the uncertainty that lies before you feels like such a huge distance in your life that you could insert a literal mountain in between them. But that's what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to press forward by faith and actually start walking up the mountain. And no, I'm not going to give you the answer at the bottom of the mountain. I need you to have substance. I need you to have evidence in your life. I want you to start putting one foot in front of the other and just trust me, Abraham. And look at what he does. It says, Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and he placed it onto his son Isaac. And he himself carried the fire and the knife. He's taking this seriously. As the two of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, Dad, the fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the two of them went on together. And that's not Abraham lying. That's not Abraham deceiving. That's Abraham saying, I know what God has promised. I know I don't see it. I'm choosing to live by faith. And it said, when they reached the place God had told them about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. And he bound his son Isaac, and he laid him on the altar and on top of the wood. And then he reached out his hand, and he took the knife to kill and slay his son. But right then, I can't wait to see this in heaven. It was play-by-play then. But an angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. How quick would you say, here am I, and not plunge the knife? It says, do not lay a hand on the boy. Don't do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God. And this isn't, I know that you're afraid of God or you're scared of God. This is the Hebrew word that meant, I know that God is first in your life. I know that you love me more than anything else. And Abraham, I'm calling out from heaven to affirm that in your life. Can you imagine how affirmed Abraham was? To say, God loves me, and I really do love God. I'm really walking this journey by faith. And he said, I know you've prioritized me because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. And then Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket, caught in a bush, there was a ram caught by his horns. And he went over and he took the ram and he sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide. And to this day, it is said, on the mountain of the Lord, it will be provided. What a story. Worship team, why don't you come up and join me? On the mountain of the Lord, it will be provided. Notice it didn't say at the bottom of the mountain, it'll be provided, or at the top of the mountain, it'll be provided. Faith means you just got to start walking up the mountain. You got to trust in the Lord's provision. And what Abraham saw when he was on the mountain, it's like he saw the shoreline that swimmer saw. He saw the thing we've got to fix our eyes on. He saw the ram. Now remember, Abraham's whole life, his relationship with God was real, but remember, he was seeing symbolically. He was seeing all these symbols, and he knew how it was going to work. He didn't have a view of what was going to happen. But when Abraham saw the ram, he was seeing this picture of Jesus. And when he watched his son walk up that mountain, he was seeing Jesus. Jesus just hadn't come yet. When you think about it, think of all the symbolism that is so true here. When he puts wood onto the back of Isaac, Jesus took the wooden cross, right? And he walked up a hill called Calvary. Calvary is in the same spot of Mount Moriah where Abraham was. That's why the Jews built the temple there for Abraham. But Jesus, he obeyed, and he took the cross because there was something in his heart that he loved so much. He said, Father, I will obey you with what I love most. And he was looking forward to us. And then it says, he found a ram, he found a lamb in the thicket that was sacrificed, where the sins was put on that, and it was sacrificed instead of Isaac. God never intended for Isaac to die. He was giving Abraham a symbol. Is it any surprise that when Jesus came, he said, I am the Lamb that takes away the sins of the world. And the Father would put all the sins of the world onto Christ as Christ would walk up Calvary and take them to the cross and pay for them once and for all. Because when Abraham's hand was stopped, God didn't stop the cross from happening. And what Abraham thought, this is just going to spell doom to the whole world if Isaac dies. The Father would say, Jesus' life will be given for salvation of the whole world. It's this whole picture of the gospel. So Abraham would say, I need to fix my eyes on that ram. I know God is going to send a Savior. In the church, that's why we fix our eyes on Christ. That's why we fix our eyes on Jesus. He's the picture. He's the one. He's the first love in our heart that we fix all of our life's devotion and all of our life's attention on is just onto Jesus Christ. I mean, I love how it puts it in Hebrews 12. Look at this. The author of Hebrews kind of sums up this list, and it says, keep your eyes on Jesus, who both began and finished this race that we're in. Study how he did it. Because he never lost sight of where he was headed, that exhilarating finish in and with God. Jesus could put up with anything along the way, the cross, shame, whatever. And now he's there in the place of honor right alongside God. And when you find yourselves flagging in your faith, go over that story of the gospel time and time again, item by item, the long litany of hostility that he plowed through for you and for me. That will shoot adrenaline into your souls. That will give you some faith.